it is truly a remarkable day when two parties, a government party that is, if anybody was to tune in for oral question period, to be in pitched opposition to the official opposition, somehow find it in their hearts to come together when it is time for committee reassignment, when it serves their own political interests. Like the member for Calgary East, I have a couple of amendments I'd like to put to this. I suspect the member for Strathmore Brooks may have as well. It's entirely remarkable that the government and the official opposition, the NDP and the UCP, here they are hand in hand, working together. Finally, maybe that's the purpose of being a centrist. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe we've actually united these two parties. We've found something that they can actually agree on. So what they do, very clearly, when the Honourable Deputy Government House Leader moved the motion, the official opposition House Leader sprang to his feet just like that, lickety-split. In fact, he got up even before she moved the motion because very clearly they had colluded and they had a plan, this nefarious little plan in the back rooms of this building, the kind of thing that Albertans absolutely hate and reject. Now, democracy isn't always convenient, it isn't always simple, it isn't always straightforward. But you know, democracy means that officially recognized parties of this assembly, of which the Alberta Party Caucus is one, would be on all of the major committees. And I remind the government side that when their members, the current now Premier and the current now Government House Leader, were but two members of the Assembly sitting in this very spot, perhaps in one of these very desks, those two members were on every single committee, including legislature offices and including member services. The two committees that govern how we run the Legislative Assembly. But they've decided to exclude the Alberta Party Caucus, an officially recognized third party, from those two committees. And they've decided to exclude the member for Calgary East from any committees at all, which is completely unheard of when the member for Calgary Mountain View, the member for Vermilion-Lloydminster, as single-member caucuses are part of a committee. When members, independent members in the past have always been assigned at least to one committee, and that is unconscionable that they would seek to exclude those members from those committees, especially back when the NDP were a small party. And Madam Speaker, I think that if they continue behaving this way, they may find themselves once again being a very small party, represented by only a couple of members of the Assembly, found themselves in a completely different position where they were put on every single committee. And I wonder if we actually were able to ask each one of the backbench members of the government party how they felt about this, in their actual heart, and if they actually really felt this is the right thing to do. Not just exclude us from the committees that we are legitimately entitled to be a part of, but this procedural trickery that's being used in collusion between the NDP and the UCP late at night, when no one seems to be watching, to just get their way, to steamroll and use the power of the Legislative Assembly and get together and roll over us smaller parties. Well, it's not why I went into elected office. In fact, maybe in some ways it is. Because I went into elected office to fight against this sort of thing, to fight against this sort of entitlement, using your muscle, this kind of bully tactics to get your way. And it is shameful. It's ironic to hear that from a member of the UCP backbench, because you're part of it. You're part of this. Right? My arguments are so compelling that we've got UCP backbenchers heckling their own motion. But it's bizarre. I mean, we're through the looking glass on this. And while it may be a technical and procedural motion, and while this may not be the topic of choice at the Red Deer Tim Hortons on the drive back to Calgary at the end of the week, this does matter. This really does matter. What happens in this House matters. How we conduct ourselves, how the business of the Legislative Assembly is conducted, actually matters. It matters to the real lives of everyday Albertans. And that we're sitting here debating a procedural motion to exclude even the possibility of us presenting amendments, which I'm not so naive as to think would perhaps be accepted by the government, although we've presented this request to the government. Would like very much, I think, to be on these committees, because that's what was done when the two government members back in 2008 were the lone voice of the NDP in the wilderness. By the way, as a 2-member caucus, we're an official party at the time, and the Alberta Party now, as a 3-member caucus, is an official party. They were on these committees that we seek to amend ourselves onto, but they're not going to even allow us the chance to debate that as to why we should be on those parties. So I'm very angry with this, and I think if Albertans tuning in today were to see what's going on, they would be angry with this as well. This is not, I think, what they thought they were going to get when they elected a new government to sweep out a 44-year dynasty, but surprising, 3.5 years in, they're starting to behave exactly the same way. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, honourable member. Are there any members wishing to speak under 29(2)A? Seeing none, are there any other members wishing to speak? The honourable